Why? Hello my friends, Hank and Roger here today. In this video, we are going to take a crack at recreating some authentic dusty weathering effects for your Vietnam era armor models. So whether you're working on an M48, an M113, a Sheridan, a Walker Bulldog, this one is for you. So let's head over to the bench and learn a little bit about why that iconic red dirt of Vietnam is, well, red. Alright, so for today's lesson, I'll be using this 1/35th scale M551 Sheridan from the good folks over at Tamiya as our sample piece, but as mentioned, this will work for really any ground vehicle operating in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. We're going to approach this video a little differently today. We're only going to be using 3 weathering products plus a matte varnish to achieve this simple but effective dusty Vietnam look. So, I'm going to include a bit more work footage for you guys and chime in every once in a while to give some context as to why we're using these particular products, but hopefully having a bit more unedited video is useful so you can get an idea of how I'm moving around the kit as we go here. Okay, worth noting, I've previously applied a simple pin wash with some enamel dark wash to this kit before sealing it all in with a matte varnish, so there has been one generic pass at weathering prior to all this dust work that we're going to do now. But we'll start today with some paint, actually. We're going to load up our brush with some Vallejo Buff. This is like a light khaki kind of color if you haven't used this before, but it works quite well for a baseline dust tone to work up from. Let's load some of this into our airbrush and cut it with a decent amount of thinner. I'd say we're looking for about a 1:4 paint to thinner ratio. And we're going to do a quick test pass on the bottom of our hull here to make sure we've got the consistency that we're looking for. Now we're going to lightly mist some of this buff over the running gear and the road wheels of our tank, allowing some of that to collect down at the bottom of the hull sides as well. Now you might notice here, we're getting some little splatter marks coming through the brush because our paint is so thin. That's actually what we are shooting for here. I'm using my single action Iwata airbrush at around 12 psi and just barely depressing the trigger to create these little paint splatters. And that's what this is achieving, sort of a light dried mud effect, as though this vehicle drove through some puddles or muddy terrain a while back and now it's dried on the surface of the hull. So with this careful manipulation of the paint coming through the airbrush, we can both dust up our running gear a bit and provide a sense of splatter towards the rear of the tracks, where excess mud would be kicking up on the tank. While we have our buff loaded up, let's keep moving around the vehicle and continuing with these effects. Enjoy the music, I'll be back in a bit. Alright gang, so our first pass of buff weathering is sprayed through our airbrush. With that on there, let's move on to our pigment work. To start our pigment portion here, let's load up an old stiff bristled brush with some of this ammo light dust. And what we're going to do is drop a bit of that onto each of our road wheels and start blending that all in. This of course looks super stark at first, but trust me, it's all part of the process. This light dust matches nicely with the buff paint we used in our previous step, but this pigment works well to replicate a drier dust effect because it's quite literally a dry dust. So we're going to move around on all sides of our vehicle and start to clump and blend this product into our tracks, our road wheels, and the lower portions of the hull. We'll also apply some of this dust rather sparingly to the upper surfaces of our tank in places where the crewmen might be moving around or dust might be collecting in some of the recesses of the vehicle. So let's keep working with this light dust, and I'll come back in a bit for our third product. Okay, so now that our light dust is on there, it's time to break out our aptly named Vietnam Earth. This product, as you can see, is a very saturated reddish orange, and it's a tone that's become synonymous with us modelers for vehicles serving in Vietnam. So while we work and apply this product on here, let's talk a little bit about why that is the case. Vietnam is a big country, obviously. It covers almost 128,000 square miles of Southeast Asia, and accordingly, it has several climate zones and a diverse geography. So no, not all of the dirt in Vietnam is bright red. That red soil we recognize here is a kind of laterite soil that commonly develops in particularly hot, wet tropical zones. Much of what was South Vietnam during the 1960s falls into that wet tropical bucket, while much of the northern part of the country is drier and more temperate. Some of the fiercest and most well-known fighting that took place during the war broke out in these southern tropical areas, classified at the time as the 2nd and 3rd Corps tactical zones, but probably more commonly known as the Mekong River Delta, Southeast Vietnam, and the Central Highlands. Without getting too much into the geology of it all, this laterite soil is super rich in iron, hence the red color. The wet, rainy climate is constantly soaking this soil, and as the water flows down through it, it leaches all the nutrients deeper and deeper down into the soil layer and creates this thick, dense red dirt, almost like clay. And during the drier season, all this softer, lighter, loose, nutrient-sapped dirt gets knocked, blown, and eventually washed away again. Rinse and repeat, literally, and over hundreds of years, you've got a super deep, thick, red, earthy soil layer, sometimes 15 to 20 plus feet deep. Turns out that dense red soil is super good for digging very resilient tunnel networks. Go figure. So, when we think of that red Vietnam dirt, it's a product of the climate of South Vietnam. This M551 Sheridan that we're working on is in the markings of a tank allocated to the 1st of the 11th Armored Cavalry starting in 1969. At the time, the Black Horse Regiment was fighting mostly out of the Binh Duong province northwest of Saigon in the infamous Iron Triangle. And accordingly, that means that the 11th Armored Cav was slugging through lots and lots of red dirt. So there you go. Bet you didn't expect a little geology lesson today, huh? In any case, our M551 now has a pretty thorough application of this famous red soil. What we're going to do now is take our empty airbrush and just blast away any of the excess product that isn't clinging super well onto our kit. And once we've gotten some of that excess off, we're going to just spray our tank with a coat of matte varnish to seal in our weathering work and wrap this all up. And with that, we've now got ourselves a decently dusted up Sheridan. It was way too clean before, this feels much better. Alright, I hope you guys enjoyed this brief foray into Vietnam soil science. Thank you for watching, and until next time, my friends, be well, happy building, cheers.